Each step across the polished marble floors of Romano's sent a sharp ache through my lower back, the weight of my hidden pregnancy making every movement a careful calculation. The gleaming surface beneath my worn black flats reflected the warm amber glow of the crystal chandeliers above, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that made me feel like an intruder in this temple of luxury. The restaurant buzzed with the soft murmur of wealthy conversations, punctuated by the delicate clink of fine crystal and the whispered commands of seasoned waitstaff who moved like dancers through the opulent dining room. My uniform, though freshly pressed, felt tight around my expanding waist, the black fabric stretching uncomfortably as I balanced the heavy silver tray against my hip. 6 months ago, I would never have imagined myself here, serving tables in one of New York's most exclusive Italian establishments. 6 months ago, I had been Amanda Carter, the naive fiancée of Marcus Delacroix, believing in fairy tales and happily ever afters. Now I was simply Amanda, a single mother-to-be trying to make ends meet in a city that showed no mercy to the vulnerable. The scent of garlic, rosemary, and expensive wine permeated the air, mixing with the subtle perfume of roses from the elaborate floral arrangements that adorned each table. My stomach churned slightly, a combination of morning sickness that persisted well into my second trimester and the anxiety that had become my constant companion. The soft Italian music playing in the background should have been soothing, but instead, it felt like a soundtrack to my precarious existence. "Table 7 needs their wine refilled," Maria whispered, as she passed me carrying a tray of steaming osso buco. Her kind eyes held concern as they always did when she looked at me. She was the only one here who suspected my condition, though she'd never asked directly. At 53, Maria had worked at Romano's for over 2 decades and had seen enough pregnant women trying to hide their condition to recognize the signs. "And Amanda," she added quietly, "Mr. Romano wants to see the new VIP section prepared. We have important guests arriving soon." My hand moved instinctively to my belly, a protective gesture I'd developed whenever stress levels rose. The baby responded with a gentle flutter, as if sensing my unease. I'd been working at Romano's for 3 months now, ever since my savings had dwindled to nothing, and the reality of single motherhood had forced me into the job market. The pay was decent, the tips were good, and most importantly, they'd hired me without asking too many questions about my past. "How important?" I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. Important guests at Romano's usually meant powerful men with dangerous reputations, the kind who could make or break careers with a single word, the kind who reminded me too much of the world I'd tried to escape. "The kind that makes Mr. Romano personally check the wine cellar," Maria replied grimly. "The kind that makes him wear his lucky tie and practice his smile in the mirror." The VIP section of Romano's was a world apart from the main dining room. Located on the mezzanine level and accessible by a sweeping marble staircase, it offered privacy and exclusivity that commanded premium prices. The lighting was more intimate, the tables spaced farther apart, and the view overlooked the bustling street below through floor-to-ceiling windows draped in rich burgundy velvet. It was here that deals were made, alliances formed, and sometimes, rumors whispered, problems were solved. As I climbed the stairs, my legs felt heavier with each step. The weight of my pregnancy combined with the long hours on my feet was taking its toll, but I couldn't afford to show weakness. Not here. Not when I needed this job so desperately. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and I paused briefly at the top of the stairs to catch my breath. The VIP dining room was empty, except for the soft glow of the wall sconces and the meticulously set tables. Each table was a work of art in itself, adorned with pristine white linens, gleaming silverware, and crystal glasses that caught the light like diamonds. The silence up here was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of the kitchen below, and the muted conversations from the main dining room. I began my preparations methodically, checking each place setting, ensuring the wine glasses were spotless, arranging the fresh orchids that served as centerpieces. The routine was comforting, giving my anxious mind something concrete to focus on. Each fold of a napkin, each adjustment of a fork, was a small act of control in a life that often felt chaotic. The sound of footsteps on the marble stairs made me freeze. Heavy, measured steps that spoke of confidence and authority. I continued working, keeping my head down as I'd learned to do, making myself invisible in the way that service workers perfected. The footsteps paused at the top of the stairs, and I could feel eyes watching me, assessing. "You're new," came a voice that made my blood run cold. Deep, authoritative, with the faintest trace of an Italian accent that spoke of old-world power and new-world ruthlessness. I knew that voice. I knew it intimately, though I'd tried for months to forget it. I forced myself to continue arranging the silverware, my hands trembling slightly as I tried to maintain my composure. "I've been here 3 months, sir," I replied without looking up, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Look at me." The command was quiet, but absolute, the kind of tone that expected immediate obedience. I had no choice but to comply. Slowly, I raised my eyes to meet the gaze of the man standing 10 feet away from me, and my worst fears were confirmed. Alexander Romano stood before me in an impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his olive skin unmarked by the passage of time, and his brown eyes held the same intense focus I remembered so well. But there was something different now, something harder and more dangerous than the passionate young man I'd known. This was a man who commanded empires, who made decisions that affected lives and fortunes. The recognition in his eyes was immediate and electric. For a moment, neither of us moved, the air between us charged with the weight of our shared history. His gaze traveled slowly from my face down to my body, and I saw the exact moment when he noticed the subtle changes in my silhouette. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign that my condition had registered. "Amanda Carter," he said slowly, as if testing the name on his tongue. Or should I say, Amanda Delacroix? Though I hear congratulations are no longer in order for that particular union. The mention of my former engagement felt like a physical blow. Marcus had left me the moment he'd discovered my pregnancy, claiming the timing wasn't right for his political aspirations. The humiliation of that abandonment still burned fresh, even months later. "It's just Amanda now," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Alexander moved closer, each step deliberate and predatory. The expensive cologne he wore brought back a flood of memories I'd tried so hard to suppress. Memories of passionate nights and whispered promises, of a love affair that had burned bright and fast before imploding spectacularly. "Just Amanda," he repeated, stopping directly in front of me. Close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to remember how those eyes had once looked at me with desire instead of this calculating coldness. Working as a waitress in my restaurant, life certainly has a sense of irony, doesn't it? "I didn't know this was your restaurant," I said, which was the truth. Romano's had been established for decades, and I'd never connected it to the Alexander Romano I'd once known. If I had, I never would have applied for a job here? He finished. "No, I imagine you wouldn't have. You always were good at running away when things became complicated." The accusation stung because it carried a grain of truth. When our relationship had become too intense, too consuming, I had run. I'd chosen the safe option, the respectable option, accepting Marcus's proposal and trying to build a conventional life. It had been the biggest mistake of my life, but I couldn't undo it now. "Mr. Romano," I began, trying to inject some professionalism into my voice. "If my presence here makes you uncomfortable, I can submit my resignation immediately." He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Resign? Oh no, Amanda, you're going to keep working here. In fact, I'm going to personally ensure you receive the very best training Romano's has to offer. You're going to learn exactly what it means to serve the kind of clientele we cater to." There was a threat hidden in his words, wrapped in the veneer of generosity. I could see it in the way his eyes glittered with something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. He wasn't just going to let me work here. He was going to make sure my time at Romano's was as difficult as possible. "I don't understand," I said, though part of me did. "Don't you?" He stepped even closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. "You made your choice 3 years ago, Amanda. You chose security over passion, respectability over love. And look how well that worked out for you." His eyes dropped briefly to my midsection again. "Abandoned, pregnant, and reduced to serving tables to survive. I'd say that's a rather fitting end to your fairy tale, wouldn't you?" The cruelty in his words made me flinch, but I forced myself to stand my ground. "My personal life is none of your concern." "Isn't it?" he asked softly. "You're carrying another man's child, working in my establishment, serving my guests. I'd say your personal life has become very much my concern." The baby chose that moment to kick particularly hard, as if responding to the tension in the room. I gasped softly and instinctively placed my hand on my belly, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "How far along?" he asked, his voice suddenly clinical. "That's not your business." "Everything that happens in this restaurant is my business. Every employee, every detail, every secret." He paused meaningfully. "And I make it my business to know everything about the people who work for me." The implication was clear. If I wanted to keep this job, I would answer his questions, and I needed this job desperately. The bills were mounting, the pregnancy was progressing, and I had nowhere else to turn. 6 months, I admitted reluctantly. Something flickered in his expression, too quick for me to interpret. 6 months, he repeated thoughtfully. "That means the conception would have been." He trailed off, doing the mental calculation. "March," I finished for him, seeing no point in hiding it. The baby was conceived in March. The month that Marcus had proposed. The month I'd tried to convince myself I was making the right choice. The month my entire life had changed irrevocably. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that made me want to disappear. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a dangerous edge. "Well then, Amanda, it seems you're going to be here for quite some time. I suggest you get comfortable." He turned toward the stairs, then paused. "Oh, and Amanda? Welcome to Romano's. I have a feeling your employment here is going to be very educational." As his footsteps faded down the marble staircase, I sank into the nearest chair, my legs finally giving out. My hands shook as I placed them on my swollen belly, feeling the baby's movements as if trying to comfort both of us. I was trapped. Trapped by necessity, by circumstances, and now by the cold fury of a man I'd once loved, but had been too afraid to choose. Alexander Romano held my future in his hands, and from the look in his eyes, he intended to make me pay for every moment of heartbreak I'd caused him. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd fled from passion and ended up serving at dinner. The following morning arrived with the kind of gray October rain that seemed to seep into your bones and settle there permanently. I stood at the cracked window of my studio apartment, watching the water streak down the glass while my coffee grew cold in my hands. Sleep had been elusive, punctuated by dreams of dark eyes and memories I'd tried so hard to bury. The baby had been restless too, as if sensing my anxiety through some invisible umbilical connection that went beyond the physical. My reflection in the window showed the toll of the sleepless night. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and my skin had the pale, drawn quality that came from stress and poor nutrition. The black uniform hung loose in some places and strained in others, a constant reminder of the changes my body was undergoing. At 6 months pregnant, I could no longer hide my condition completely, though the loose-fitting shirt helped disguise the extent of my bump. The phone buzzed on my nightstand, jolting me from my brooding. Unknown number, but the area code was local. My stomach clenched as I answered, already suspecting who might be calling so early. "Miss Carter?" The voice was crisp, professional, female. "This is Elena Vasquez, personal assistant to Mr. Romano. He's requested that you arrive at the restaurant an hour early today for additional training." Additional training. The word sent a chill down my spine. What kind of training? "Mr. Romano will explain when you arrive. Please use the staff entrance on the side street. Someone will be waiting to escort you." The line went dead before I could ask any more questions. I stared at the phone for a long moment, considering my options. I could quit, walk away, find another job somewhere else in the city. But the reality was harsh and unforgiving. I was 6 months pregnant, had no family support, and my savings account had exactly $237 in it. Romano's paid better than most restaurants, and the tips were substantial. I couldn't afford to lose this job, and Alexander knew it. The rain had intensified by the time I reached Romano's, turning the elegant facade into something almost gothic in the gray morning light. The side entrance Elena had mentioned was barely visible, tucked away in an alley that smelled of garbage and wet concrete. A stark contrast to the opulent front entrance with its brass fixtures and red carpet. A man in a black suit was indeed waiting for me, his presence somehow making the narrow alley feel even more claustrophobic. He was tall, built like a linebacker, with the kind of alert stillness that spoke of military training or worse. His eyes swept over me with professional assessment before he nodded toward a heavy steel door. "Miss Carter, Mr. Romano is waiting upstairs." The staff entrance led to a part of Romano's I'd never seen before. A utilitarian corridor with concrete floors and fluorescent lighting that hummed overhead. We passed what looked like storage rooms, an office filled with filing cabinets, and a security station equipped with multiple monitors showing different angles of the restaurant. I caught glimpses of the main dining room, the kitchen, the VIP section, and areas I didn't recognize. "How long have you worked for Mr. Romano?" I asked, trying to break the oppressive silence. 7 years, the man replied, without elaborating. His voice carried a slight accent, possibly Eastern European. We reached an elevator I hadn't known existed, its brass doors polished to a mirror shine. The elevator rose smoothly, and I realized we were going above the restaurant's main floors. When the doors opened, I found myself in what could only be described as a penthouse office. The space was a study in controlled luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while rich mahogany furniture and Persian rugs created an atmosphere of old-world elegance. Original paintings adorned the walls, and I recognized at least one Monet among them. This wasn't just an office. It was a statement of power and wealth. Alexander stood with his back to me, silhouetted against the gray morning sky. He wore a navy suit today, perfectly tailored to his lean frame, and his dark hair caught the dim light filtering through the windows. Even from behind, he radiated the kind of authority that made people instinctively defer to his wishes. "Thank you, Victor," he said, without turning around. "That will be all." The elevator doors closed behind me with a soft whisper, leaving us alone in the vast office. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken history and current tension. Finally, Alexander turned to face me, and I was struck again by how much he'd changed. The passionate young man I'd known had been replaced by someone harder, more calculating. Success had sharpened him into a weapon. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing toward one of the leather chairs positioned in front of his desk. I remained standing, some stubborn part of me refusing to be ordered around like a subordinate. "What kind of training am I here for?" A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. The kind that will ensure you understand your position here, Amanda. The kind that will remind you exactly who holds the power in this relationship. We don't have a relationship, I said firmly. We have an employment arrangement, nothing more. Is that what you think? He moved closer, each step measured and deliberate. You think you can work in my restaurant, serve my guests, take my money, and pretend we're strangers? You think I'll allow you to hide behind some professional facade after what you did? What I did? The accusation stung, because I knew exactly what he meant. But I'd convinced myself over the years that I'd made the right choice. I made a decision about my future. I chose stability over uncertainty. You chose him over me, Alexander said flatly. You chose his political connections and family money over what we had together. Don't dress it up in noble language, Amanda. You abandoned me for a better offer. The words hit their mark because they contained enough truth to hurt. I had been seduced by Marcus's promises of security, by the life he'd offered that seemed so much safer than the intensity of what I'd shared with Alexander. But I'd also been terrified by the depth of my feelings for Alexander, by how completely he'd consumed my thoughts and desires. You scared me, I admitted quietly. What we had, it was too much, too intense. I couldn't breathe when I was with you. And yet here you are, working in my restaurant, breathing just fine. His voice was soft, dangerous. Tell me, Amanda, how did that security work out for you? How stable was the man who left you pregnant and alone? The mention of my pregnancy and abandonment was like a physical blow. My hand moved instinctively to my belly, and I saw Alexander's eyes follow the gesture with something that might have been satisfaction. Marcus isn't relevant to this conversation, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Isn't he? The father of your child isn't relevant? Alexander moved to his desk and picked up a manila folder. I know all about Marcus Delacroix, Amanda. I know about his political ambitions, his family's expectations, his very public decision to distance himself from any personal complications that might damage his image. He opened the folder and began reading from what looked like newspaper clippings. State Assembly candidate Marcus Delacroix confirms end of engagement due to irreconcilable differences. Sources close to the candidate suggest his focus is entirely on public service. Alexander looked up at me. No mention of you, of course. No mention of the child you're carrying. You've been erased from his narrative entirely. The humiliation of seeing my private pain reduced to political calculation was overwhelming. I'd known Marcus had been strategic about our breakup, but seeing it documented so clinically made it real in a way I'd been avoiding. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because I want you to understand your situation completely, Alexander replied, closing the folder. You have no safety net, Amanda. No family support, no trust fund, no powerful connections to help you. All you have is this job, and this job belongs to me. He was right, and we both knew it. I was trapped by circumstances and biology, by poor choices and worse luck. The baby kicked as if responding to my spike in stress, and I placed both hands on my belly protectively. I need to sit down, I admitted, the weight of everything suddenly too much to bear. Alexander's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Of course. He moved to help me into the chair, his touch brief but gentle as he steadied my arm. For just a moment, I caught a glimpse of the man I'd once known, the one who'd been tender and protective before pride and hurt had turned him cold. Are you all right? He asked, his voice losing some of its hard edge. I'm fine. It's just the baby. I settled into the leather chair, grateful for the support. You said something about training? Alexander moved behind his desk, putting distance between us again. You're going to be trained to handle our most exclusive clientele. VIP service requires a specific skill set, a certain discretion. You'll learn to anticipate needs, to see without being seen, to hear without remembering. And if I refuse, then you'll be terminated for failure to perform assigned duties." His tone was matter of fact, but the threat was clear. Of course, I doubt any other establishment in the city would hire a pregnant waitress with a poor employment reference. The trap was expertly constructed, and I could see all the ways it would close around me. Alexander had effectively cornered me, using my desperation and his power to ensure my compliance. The worst part was that some small, traitorous part of me was relieved. Working in the VIP section meant better tips, more stable income, and the chance to provide better for my baby. "When do I start?" I asked, surrender evident in my voice. "Today. Elena will provide you with the specific protocols and expectations. You'll shadow Maria for the first week, then graduate to handling VIP tables independently." He paused, studying my face. "There are rules, Amanda. Strict rules about confidentiality, about maintaining appropriate boundaries with guests, about representing Romano's reputation with discretion. I understand. Do you?" He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "Because some of our VIP guests have very particular requirements. They value privacy above all else, and they expect absolute discretion from our staff. They also tend to be generous with employees who meet their expectations." There was something in his tone that made me uneasy, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. "What kind of guests?" "The kind who appreciate fine dining and value privacy. The kind who have the resources to pay for both." His smile was sharp. "The kind who don't ask questions about pregnant waitresses who need steady employment." The elevator chimed softly, and Elena stepped out carrying a silver tray with coffee and what looked like pastries. She was an elegant woman in her 40s, with sleek black hair and the kind of polished professionalism that spoke of years in executive assistance. "I thought you might need something to eat," she said to me with genuine kindness. "Pregnancy can be demanding." "Thank you," I said gratefully, realizing I hadn't eaten anything since yesterday evening. "Elena will show you to the employee break room and explain your new schedule," Alexander said, rising from behind his desk. "You'll start training this afternoon." As I stood to leave, he called my name softly. "Amanda." I turned back to find him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Welcome to the family business," he said, and something in his tone made my blood run cold. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into a different world, one where Alexander Romano held all the cards, and I was just another piece in whatever game he was playing. But as the baby kicked gently against my ribs, I reminded myself why I was doing this. I needed this job, needed the money, needed the security it provided for my child. I just hoped the price wouldn't be higher than I could afford to pay. 3 weeks had passed since my promotion to VIP service, and I was beginning to understand the carefully orchestrated world Alexander had drawn me into. The exclusive clientele who frequented Romano's upper level weren't just wealthy. They were powerful in ways that made ordinary influence seem quaint. I served wine to federal judges, delivered messages between senators, and watched million-dollar deals negotiated over 7-course meals. Each shift felt like walking through a minefield of secrets and unspoken alliances. The training had been thorough and uncompromising. Elena had taught me to read the subtle signals that indicated when conversations should remain private, which guests preferred specific wines without being asked, and how to move through the dining room like a shadow. Maria had shown me the practical skills: how to pour wine without making a sound, how to anticipate needs before they were voiced, and most importantly, how to forget everything I heard the moment my shift ended. But it was the nights that challenged me most. My apartment felt increasingly cramped and unsafe as my pregnancy progressed, and the climb to the 4th floor left me breathless and dizzy. The baby was growing stronger, more active, making its presence known with kicks that sometimes took my breath away. At 7 months pregnant, I could no longer hide my condition, though the VIP clients seemed to regard my pregnancy with a kind of respectful distance. as if motherhood granted me some sort of diplomatic immunity. Tonight was different. I could sense it the moment I arrived for my shift. Elena greeted me at the staff entrance with an expression that was more tense than usual, her normally perfect composure showing subtle cracks. "Amanda, Mr. Romano wants to see you in his office before you begin service tonight," she said, leading me toward the private elevator. "There's been a development regarding your situation." "What kind of development?" I asked, one hand instinctively moving to my belly. "He'll explain everything," Elena replied, but her tone suggested she knew more than she was willing to share. The elevator ride felt longer than usual, each floor marking my ascent into whatever new complication Alexander had discovered. When the doors opened, I found his office transformed. The usual elegant lighting had been replaced by the harsh glow of multiple computer screens, and several men in expensive suits were gathered around his desk, their voices low and urgent. Alexander looked up as I entered, and I was struck by the fatigue in his eyes. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. His tie was loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and there was a tension in his shoulders that spoke of long hours and difficult decisions. "Gentlemen, we'll continue this discussion later," he said to the assembled group. They filed out quickly, but not before I caught the calculating looks they gave me. One of them, a silver-haired man with cold blue eyes, paused near me and spoke quietly to Alexander. "You're certain about this approach?" he asked. "Completely," Alexander replied, his voice carrying the kind of finality that ended debates. When we were alone, Alexander moved to pour himself a drink from the crystal decanter on his sideboard. His movements were controlled but tense, like a man operating under tremendous pressure. "Sit down, Amanda," he said without looking at me. "We need to discuss your ex-fiancé." The mention of Marcus sent a chill down my spine. "What about him?" Alexander turned to face me, whiskey glass in hand. "Marcus Delacroix has become a problem. His political ambitions have led him to make some unfortunate alliances, and those alliances are now threatening people I care about. I don't understand what this has to do with me. Don't you?" Alexander moved closer, his dark eyes searching my face. "You were engaged to him for 8 months. You lived in his apartment, attended his political functions, met his associates. You have intimate knowledge of his network, his habits, his vulnerabilities." The implication was becoming clear, and I didn't like where this conversation was heading. "You want me to spy on Marcus? I haven't spoken to him since he left me. I have no contact with his world anymore, but you could," Alexander said softly, "if properly motivated." "No." I stood up, my pregnancy making the movement awkward but determined. "Whatever game you're playing with Marcus, leave me out of it. I won't be a weapon in your war." Alexander's expression hardened. "This isn't a request, Amanda. This is about survival. Marcus has aligned himself with people who would see me destroyed, and they're not particular about collateral damage. Then deal with him yourself. You're Alexander Romano. Surely you have resources that don't require a pregnant ex-girlfriend." "You're right, I do," he said, setting down his glass with deliberate care. "But none of them are carrying his child." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank back into the chair, my hands moving protectively to my belly. "The baby isn't his," I said quietly. Alexander's laugh was bitter. "Isn't it? Let me refresh your memory about the timeline, Amanda. You broke up with me in February. You got engaged to Marcus in March. The baby was conceived in March. Either Marcus is the father, or you were sleeping with both of us at the same time." The accusation hung in the air between us, ugly and unavoidable. I closed my eyes, remembering those confusing final weeks with Alexander, the way our relationship had been disintegrating even as the passion between us burned hotter than ever. I remembered the night I'd gone to him one last time, 3 days before accepting Marcus's proposal. I remembered the desperate, almost violent way we'd made love, as if we both knew it was goodbye. It was one night, I whispered. 3 days before I said yes to Marcus. One night, Alexander repeated. And now, 7 months later, you're pregnant. The timing is very interesting, don't you think? I did the math in my head, calculations I'd been avoiding for months. The baby could be either man's child. The uncertainty had been eating at me since the moment I'd discovered my pregnancy. But I'd pushed the thoughts away, telling myself it didn't matter since Marcus had abandoned me anyway. Have you had a paternity test? Alexander asked, his voice deceptively casual. No, I admitted. Marcus left before I could suggest it, and I saw no point in pursuing it afterward. I think you should, he said. I think we both should know for certain whose child you're carrying. The suggestion terrified me more than I wanted to admit. Not because I feared the answer, but because I feared what Alexander would do with the information. If the baby was his, would he try to claim it? If it was Marcus's, would he use it as leverage in whatever conflict was brewing between them? And if the baby is yours, I asked, then you and my child will be under my protection permanently, he said without hesitation. No one will ever be able to hurt either of you. And if it's Marcus's? Alexander's expression became unreadable. Then you'll help me ensure that Marcus understands the consequences of his political choices. By using his child as a threat? By using his child as motivation to make better decisions, Alexander corrected. Marcus cares about his image above all else. A pregnant ex-fiancée and unacknowledged child could be very damaging to his political aspirations. I stood up again, this time with more determination. I won't be part of this, Alexander. I won't let you use my baby as a pawn in your game. You don't have a choice, he said quietly. The paternity test will happen, Amanda. The only question is whether you cooperate willingly, or I arrange for it to be done another way. The threat was clear, and I realized how completely he had me trapped. He had the resources, the connections, and the ruthless determination to make good on his promise. I was pregnant, alone, and dependent on his employment for survival. You're not the man I fell in love with, I said, my voice breaking slightly. For just a moment, something flickered in Alexander's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or regret. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. That man was weak, he said. He believed in love and trust and happy endings. This man knows better. This man understands that power is the only protection that matters. And what about love? What about the connection we had? Alexander moved closer until he was standing directly in front of me. Close enough that I could smell his cologne, close enough to remember how safe I'd once felt in his arms. Love is a luxury I can't afford, he said softly. But protection, security for you and your child, that I can provide in abundance. At what cost? At whatever cost is necessary, he replied. The world is a dangerous place, Amanda, especially for people who matter to me. The admission that I mattered to him sent a confusing rush of warmth through me, even as his methods terrified me. I wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to understand the nature of the threat that had made him so ruthless, but I was afraid of the answers. I need time to think, I said finally. You have until tomorrow evening, Alexander replied. The paternity test will be arranged for Monday morning. After that, we'll discuss your new role in resolving the Marcus situation. As I turned to leave, he called my name one more time. Amanda? I looked back at him. This man who had once been my whole world and was now my captor. For what it's worth, he said, his voice softer than it had been all evening. I hope the child is mine. The elevator ride down gave me time to process the evening's revelations, but instead of clarity, I found only more confusion. Alexander's ultimatum was clear. Submit to the paternity test and help him with whatever he had planned for Marcus. or face the consequences of defying him. But beneath his ruthless maneuvering, I'd sensed something else. Something that looked almost like hope when he'd spoken about the possibility of the baby being his. The main dining room was busy when I finally began my shift, but I moved through my duties on autopilot. My mind was consumed with impossible calculations and terrifying possibilities. If the baby was Alexander's, my life would change irrevocably. If it was Marcus's, I would become a weapon in a war I didn't understand. But as I served wine to senators and cleared plates for federal judges, I began to realize something else. In this world of power and politics, protection and security weren't just luxuries, they were necessities. And Alexander Romano, for all his ruthless methods, was offering me something Marcus never had. A place in his world where my child would never want for anything. The question was whether I was strong enough to pay the price he was asking, and whether I could trust him with the most precious thing in my life, my baby's future. The paternity test results arrived on a Tuesday morning that dawned gray and bitter, with the kind of November wind that cut through even the thickest coat. I sat in the same leather chair in Alexander's office, the sealed envelope on his desk between us like an unexploded bomb. Neither of us had spoken since I'd arrived 10 minutes earlier, both lost in our own thoughts about what the contents might mean. Alexander looked different today. More relaxed, perhaps, or maybe just resigned to whatever truth the envelope contained. He wore a black suit with a charcoal tie, and his hair was perfectly styled as always. But there was something in his posture that suggested a man who had already made peace with multiple possible outcomes. "Before we open this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I need to know what happened to Marcus." Alexander's eyes met mine across the mahogany expanse of his desk. "Marcus is no longer a concern. His political career ended rather abruptly last week when certain financial irregularities came to light. He's currently more focused on avoiding federal prison than pursuing public office." "Did you—" "I simply provided the appropriate authorities with information they needed to do their jobs," Alexander said calmly. "Marcus made his own choices. I merely ensured those choices had consequences." The casual way he spoke about destroying a man's life should have terrified me, but instead I felt a strange sense of relief. Marcus had abandoned me when I needed him most, leaving me to face pregnancy and poverty alone. Whatever Alexander had done to him, Marcus had earned through his own cruelty and cowardice. "And now?" I asked. "Now we discover whether you're carrying my child or the child of a disgraced politician," Alexander replied. He picked up the envelope, turning it over in his hands. "Either way, Amanda, you and this baby will be under my protection. The only question is the nature of that protection. Meaning if this child is mine, you'll be the mother of my heir. If it's not." He paused, studying my face. "If it's not, you'll still be under my care, but as something more like an honored guest than family." The distinction was significant, and we both knew it. As the mother of Alexander's child, I would have status, security, and a permanent place in his life. As anything else, I would be dependent on his continued goodwill and protection. "Open it," I said, unable to bear the suspense any longer. Alexander broke the seal with careful precision, unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. I watched his face as he read, looking for any sign of what the results revealed. His expression remained carefully neutral, but I caught a slight tightening around his eyes that could have been satisfaction or disappointment. "Well?" I asked, when the silence became unbearable. He set the paper down and looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Congratulations, Amanda. You're carrying my child." The words hit me like a physical force, sending a rush of emotions through me that I wasn't prepared for. Relief, terror, joy, and something that felt disturbingly like triumph all warred for dominance in my chest. The baby kicked strongly, as if responding to the revelation, and I placed both hands on my swollen belly. "Are you certain?" I asked, though I could see the certainty in Alexander's eyes. 99.7% probability of paternity, he read from the paper. "In legal terms, I am definitively the father of your child." Alexander stood and moved around the desk, kneeling beside my chair with a grace that spoke of years of martial arts training. His hands covered mine where they rested on my belly, and for the first time in months, I felt truly safe. "Our child," he said softly, his voice carrying a wonder I'd never heard from him before. "Our child," I repeated, testing the words. His touch was gentle as he spread his fingers across my belly, and the baby responded immediately, kicking against his palm as if recognizing its father's presence. Alexander's face transformed, the hard mask of power and control giving way to something vulnerable and amazed. "Hello, little one," he whispered to my belly. "Daddy's here now." The tenderness in his voice broke something inside me that I'd been keeping carefully controlled. Tears I'd been holding back for months finally spilled over, and Alexander gathered me into his arms with infinite care. "It's all right," he murmured against my hair. "Everything's going to be all right now. I'll take care of both of you." "I'm scared," I admitted, the words muffled against his shoulder. "I know, but you don't have to be scared anymore. You're mine now, Amanda. Both of you are mine, and I protect what's mine with everything I have." The possessiveness in his words should have alarmed me, but instead, they felt like a promise of safety I'd been craving since Marcus had walked out of my life. In Alexander's arms, I could finally allow myself to believe that my baby would be born into security instead of uncertainty. "What happens now?" I asked as he helped me back into the chair. "Now you move out of that death trap you call an apartment and into the penthouse," Alexander said, his tone brooking no argument. "You stop working as a waitress and start preparing to be the mother of my heir. You see the best doctors, eat the best food, and want for nothing." "Alexander, I can't just—" "You can and you will," he interrupted. "You're 7 months pregnant with my child, Amanda. You're not living in a 4th-floor walk-up with broken heating and questionable plumbing. You're not serving tables until you collapse from exhaustion. Those days are over." The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. For months, I'd been terrified about how I would manage as a single mother, how I would afford childcare and medical bills and all the countless expenses that came with a baby. Alexander was offering to take all those worries away. "But what about us?" I asked. "What are we to each other now?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with an expression I couldn't quite read. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "That depends on what you want us to be," he said. "I won't force you into anything you're not ready for, Amanda. But I will insist on certain non-negotiables. You and our child will live under my protection. You'll accept my financial support, and you'll allow me to be a father to this baby. And beyond that? Beyond that, we have time to figure things out," he said. "We have a history, Amanda. Good and bad, passionate and painful. We also have a future now, connected through this child. How we navigate that future is up to us." The careful diplomacy of his words couldn't quite hide the deeper currents beneath them. I could see the desire in his eyes, the hope that we might rebuild something from the ashes of our destroyed relationship. But I could also see the wariness, the fear that I might hurt him again as I had before. "I need you to know something," I said, gathering courage from somewhere I didn't know I possessed. "The night before I accepted Marcus's proposal, when I came to you, I knew it might be goodbye forever. I knew I was choosing safety over love, and I hated myself for it." Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Then why did you do it?" "Because I was terrified of how much I loved you," I admitted. "Because when I was with you, I lost myself completely. I couldn't think straight, couldn't make rational decisions. You consumed me in a way that felt dangerous. And Marcus felt safe? Marcus felt controllable, I corrected. He offered me a life I could understand, predict, manage. You offered me passion and intensity, and a love so complete, it scared me. And now I'm older, hopefully wiser, and I understand that safety without love isn't really safety at all. It's just a prettier prison. Alexander moved closer, his hand reaching out to cup my face with infinite gentleness. And what do you want now, Amanda? I want to try again, I whispered. I want to see if we can build something real this time, something that lasts. Even knowing what kind of man I am, what kind of world I live in. Especially knowing that, I said. Because this time I understand that love without power to protect it is just vulnerability. And I've had enough of being vulnerable. Alexander's smile was slow, transformative, turning him back into the man I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. Then welcome home, Amanda. Welcome to the family. He kissed me then, soft and careful, mindful of my condition, but full of promise for the future. The baby kicked between us, as if celebrating the reunion of its parents, and I felt something settle into place that had been broken for far too long. When we broke apart, Alexander rested his forehead against mine. There are things you need to know about my business, about the people I deal with. It's not always pretty, and it's sometimes dangerous. I understand. Do you? Because once you're in this world completely, there's no going back. You'll be protected, but you'll also be a target. Our child will inherit both privileges and responsibilities that come with the Romano name. I accept that, I said, meaning it. Whatever the cost, it has to be better than the alternative. The alternative? Raising our child alone, poor and defenseless, I said. At least this way, our baby will never want for anything, never be vulnerable the way I was. Alexander's expression grew serious. There's something else. Elena has prepared a suite for you in the penthouse. You'll move in tonight. We'll take things slowly, but I need you close. I need to know you're safe. Tonight? The apartment you're living in isn't secure, Amanda. Now that you're carrying my child, that makes you a valuable target for people who would use you to hurt me. I can't protect you if you're across the city in a building with no security. The reminder of the dangerous realities of Alexander's world sent a chill through me, but it also reinforced my decision. Our child deserved better than a mother who was struggling just to survive. What do I need to know about being part of your world? I asked. That loyalty is everything. That family comes first, always. And that the people who matter to me are protected with my life. But they're also expected to be worthy of that protection. Meaning? Meaning you represent me now, Amanda. Your choices reflect on my reputation. Your safety affects my peace of mind. Your happiness matters to me more than you know. The weight of responsibility in his words was sobering, but also oddly comforting. After months of feeling completely alone, the idea of being part of something larger, something powerful enough to protect what mattered, was incredibly appealing. I'll do my best to be worthy of it, I said. You already are, Alexander replied, his hand moving to rest over our child again. You're giving me the greatest gift I could ever receive. A family, a future, a reason to build something that lasts beyond just business and power. As I sat in that elegant office, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and influence, feeling my baby move beneath the protective hands of its father, I realized that sometimes the most important surrenders were the ones that felt like victory. I was giving up my independence, my freedom to make my own choices, my ability to leave when things got difficult. But in return, I was gaining something I'd never truly had, a partner powerful enough to protect what we were building together, and the security to love without fear of losing everything. The negotiation was over. The terms were set. Now came the much more complicated task of learning to live within them. Moving into Alexander's penthouse felt like stepping into another universe, one where my previous life seemed like a half-remembered dream. The suite Elena had prepared occupied the entire east wing of the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of Central Park and the Manhattan skyline. The bedroom alone was larger than my entire studio apartment, furnished with pieces that probably cost more than I'd made in my entire lifetime. But it was the nursery that took my breath away completely. Alexander had commissioned the room while we waited for the paternity results, he told me as he led me through the space that first evening. The walls were painted in soft sage green, with hand-painted murals of Central Park in different seasons. A rocking chair that looked like it belonged in a palace sat beside the crib, which was clearly handcrafted and probably worth more than a car. Everything was perfect, elegant, and clearly chosen by someone who understood that this child would want for nothing. "You did all this before knowing if the baby was yours?" I asked, running my fingers along the smooth wood of the crib rail. "I hoped," Alexander said simply. "And I wanted to be prepared either way. If the child was mine, I wanted everything to be perfect. If it wasn't..." He paused. "If it wasn't, I still wanted you both to be safe and comfortable." The admission revealed a vulnerability I hadn't expected. Alexander Romano, the man who commanded empires and inspired fear in his enemies, had decorated a nursery on hope alone. 2 weeks had passed since I'd moved in, and I was beginning to understand the careful choreography of Alexander's world. His days began before dawn with phone calls to associates across different time zones. Elena managed his schedule with military precision, ensuring he was always 3 steps ahead of whatever crisis might emerge. The penthouse was a fortress of luxury, but it was also a command center from which Alexander orchestrated complex business dealings that seemed to touch every aspect of the city's power structure. I was 8 months pregnant now, and my body was making its own demands known with increasing urgency. Dr. Patricia Henley, the obstetrician Alexander had insisted I see, was the best in the city and had already warned us that the baby could arrive any time in the next few weeks. Each day brought new aches, new limitations, and a growing anticipation that was both exciting and terrifying. "You're restless," Alexander observed one evening, as I stood at the windows watching the sun set over the park. He'd arrived home earlier than usual, which had become his pattern as my due date approached. "I feel like I'm in limbo," I admitted. "Waiting for the baby, waiting to see what our life will really look like when it arrives. Everything feels suspended." Alexander moved behind me, his hands settling on my shoulders with the kind of gentle pressure that had become second nature to him since I'd moved in. He was always touching me now, a hand on my back as I navigated stairs, fingers tracing soothing circles on my palm when he sensed I was anxious, arms supporting me when I struggled to get comfortable. It was as if he was trying to rebuild our physical connection through constant, careful contact. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made me turn to face him. "What kind of something?" "The kind that affects our security," he said grimly. "Marcus may be out of the picture, but his former associates aren't ready to let things go. They've been making inquiries about you, about the baby. They know you're here." Ice formed in my stomach. "What kind of inquiries?" "The kind that suggest they're considering using you as leverage against me," Alexander said. "They think a pregnant woman and newborn baby might be effective pressure points. But the baby isn't even born yet. How could they—" "Amanda," Alexander interrupted gently. "These aren't people who limit themselves to conventional approaches. If they think hurting you or our child will force me to back down from business disputes, they'll try it." The casual way he spoke about people threatening my unborn baby sent a surge of protective fury through me so strong it was almost physical. I placed both hands on my belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly, as if sensing my distress. What are you going to do about it? I asked, and I was surprised by the steel in my own voice. Everything necessary, Alexander replied, but I need you to understand that things are going to change. Security will be increased. Your movements will be more restricted. And after the baby is born. He paused. After the baby is born, we'll need to consider more permanent solutions. What kind of permanent solutions? Alexander moved to pour himself a drink from the bar cart, his movements controlled but tense. The kind that ensure threats to my family don't persist long enough to become actions. The implication was clear, and surprisingly, it didn't horrify me the way it might have months ago. These people were threatening my unborn child. If Alexander was prepared to eliminate that threat permanently, I found myself entirely supportive of whatever methods he deemed necessary. Good, I said firmly. Alexander paused with the glass halfway to his lips, clearly surprised by my response. Good? No one threatens our baby, I said, and I was amazed by the vehemence in my voice. No one threatens our family. If that means you have to be ruthless to protect us, then be ruthless. Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a kind of recognition and approval that made my chest warm. You're learning to think like a Romano, he said, with what might have been pride. I'm learning to think like a mother, I corrected, a mother with something to protect. He set down his glass and moved to me, pulling me into his arms with infinite care for my expanded shape. I need you to know that whatever I do, whatever decisions I make, they're all about keeping you and our child safe. Not my business, not my reputation. You. I know, I said, and realized I meant it completely. I trust you, Alexander. Even knowing what I'm capable of? Especially knowing what you're capable of, I replied. Because I know you'll use every bit of that capability to protect what matters to you. He kissed me then, deeper than the careful pecks we'd been sharing, and I felt the passion that had always existed between us flare back to life. My body was awkward and unwieldy, but the desire was as strong as ever, complicated now by trust and shared purpose. There's more, he said when we broke apart. Elena has identified someone in Marcus's former circle who's been particularly vocal about making me pay for his political downfall. Someone who has the resources and motivation to be genuinely dangerous. Who? Charles Bradford. He was Marcus's primary financial backer, and my actions cost him significant political influence. He's also the kind of man who holds grudges and has the means to act on them. I remembered Charles from the political functions I'd attended with Marcus. An older man with silver hair and cold blue eyes, who'd always made me uncomfortable with the way he looked at me, as if I was a commodity to be evaluated and potentially acquired. What does he want? Initially, he wanted Marcus back in a position of power so he could recoup his political investments. Since that's no longer possible, he seems to have decided that destroying me is an acceptable alternative. Alexander's jaw tightened. He's made several attempts to damage my business relationships and has been asking questions about our personal life that suggest he's looking for vulnerabilities. And he sees me as a vulnerability? He sees you as leverage, Alexander corrected. A pregnant woman he could threaten or harm to force me into making concessions I'd never consider otherwise. The clinical way he discussed the threat should have been frightening, but instead, it filled me with a cold determination. Charles Bradford had no idea what he was dealing with. He thought he could use me to hurt Alexander, but he didn't understand that I was no longer the frightened, abandoned woman who'd been serving tables 8 months ago. I was the mother of Alexander Romano's child, and that made me as dangerous as I was valuable. How do we stop him? I asked. We? Alexander raised an eyebrow. We? I confirmed. This is our family he's threatening. Our child. I'm not going to sit in this beautiful prison while you handle everything alone. Alexander studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him weighing my words against his protective instincts. Finally, he nodded slowly. Bradford operates through intermediaries and shell companies, which makes him difficult to reach directly. But he has weaknesses. A gambling problem he thinks he's hidden, a son with expensive drug habits, and a wife who doesn't know about either issue. Blackmail? Information sharing, Alexander corrected with a slight smile. Mrs. Bradford deserves to know how her husband is spending their money. The Gaming Commission deserves to know about his undisclosed gambling debts. His son's employer deserves to know about the cocaine habit that's affecting his performance. It was elegant and vicious, destroying Bradford through the exposure of his own secrets rather than direct confrontation. More importantly, it would neutralize the threat to our family without putting Alexander at risk of legal consequences. When? I asked. After the baby is born, Alexander said. I want you focused on nothing but a safe delivery until then. After that, we'll handle Bradford and anyone else who thinks they can threaten what's mine. What's mine? The possessiveness in his voice sent a thrill through me that I was no longer ashamed to acknowledge. I was his, and he was mine, and our child would be born into a family that would protect it with everything they had. That night, as I lay in our bed with Alexander's hand resting protectively on my belly, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. 8 months ago, I'd been alone, frightened, and facing an uncertain future. Now I was part of something larger and more powerful than I'd ever imagined possible. The baby kicked strongly against Alexander's palm, and he murmured something in Italian that sounded like a promise. Whatever threats existed in the world outside this penthouse, whatever enemies circled like vultures waiting for weakness, they would find none here. We were Romano now, all three of us, and that meant something in this city. It meant protection, power, and the kind of security that came not from hiding, but from being too dangerous to threaten. The web Alexander had woven around me had become my world, but I was no longer its captive. I was its queen, and our child would be its prince or princess. Let Charles Bradford and anyone else who thought they could use us as leverage come. They would discover that some families were too strong to break, and some women were too fierce to intimidate, especially when they had everything in the world to protect. Arya Romano arrived on a snow-covered Thursday morning in December, 3 weeks before her official due date, and with a determination that seemed to echo her father's personality. The labor was intense but mercifully short, lasting only 6 hours from the first contraction to the moment Dr. Henley placed our daughter in my arms. She was perfect. 7 pounds, 2 ounces of pure miracle, with Alexander's dark hair and what appeared to be my green eyes, though the doctor assured us that could change. Her cry was strong and indignant, as if she was protesting being removed from her warm sanctuary into the bright, cold world. "She's beautiful," Alexander whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he gently touched her tiny fist. He'd stayed by my side through the entire labor, holding my hand, encouraging me through each contraction, and serving as my anchor when the pain threatened to overwhelm me. Now, looking at him cradle our daughter for the first time, I saw a transformation that took my breath away. The powerful, sometimes ruthless man who commanded an empire had become completely vulnerable to this tiny person who couldn't even hold her head up yet. His large hands were impossibly gentle as he supported her, and when she wrapped her miniature fingers around his thumb, I saw tears gather in his eyes. "Hello, Principessa," he murmured to her in Italian. "Daddy's here. Daddy will always be here." The private suite at Mount Sinai Hospital was more like a luxury hotel room than a medical facility, with fresh flowers, gourmet meals, and a level of service that spoke to Alexander's influence. But I barely noticed the opulent surroundings. My entire world had narrowed to the baby in my arms, and the man beside me who was already planning how to protect and spoil our daughter. "She needs a middle name," I said as Arya settled into sleep against my chest. "We never discussed middle names." "Grace," Alexander said without hesitation. "Arya Grace Romano. Grace for the miracle of having both of you safe and healthy. Grace, I repeated, testing how it sounded. Aria Grace Romano. I love it. And I love you, Alexander said, his voice carrying a depth of emotion that made my heart race. Both of you. More than I ever thought possible. It was the first time he'd said those words since my return to his life, and they hit me with the force of a revelation. Not because I doubted his feelings, but because I finally understood that this time was different. This time, we had something worth fighting for together. I love you too, I whispered back. All of this, everything we've built, it feels like coming home. Alexander leaned down to kiss my forehead, then Aria's. You are home, both of you, forever. The peace of that moment was shattered by Elena's arrival. She knocked softly before entering, her usually composed expression showing signs of strain. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said quietly, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Alexander's entire demeanor shifted, the tender father transforming back into the commanding businessman in an instant. What kind of situation? Charles Bradford has escalated his timeline. He's made contact with someone claiming to have information about Amanda's location and the baby's birth. Our sources suggest he's planning something for tonight. The blood in my veins turned to ice. Tonight? But Aria was just born. She's only a few hours old. Which is exactly why he's moving now, Alexander said grimly. He thinks we're vulnerable, distracted by the birth. He's wrong, but that won't stop him from trying. Elena stepped closer, lowering her voice even though we were alone. There's more. He's not working alone. He's hired professional contractors, the kind who don't ask questions about targets or methods. I pulled Aria closer to my chest instinctively, my maternal instincts screaming danger, even as my rational mind tried to process what Elena was telling us. Someone wanted to hurt my baby, my hours-old daughter who had never done anything to anyone. Options? Alexander asked, his voice deadly calm. We can increase security here and wait for them to make their move, but that puts Amanda and the baby at risk, Elena replied. Or we can transfer them to the estate tonight, where we have better control over the environment. Transfer them? Tonight? I just gave birth hours ago, I protested. Amanda, Alexander said gently but firmly, if Bradford is planning something for tonight, I need you and Aria somewhere I can guarantee your safety. The estate has security measures the hospital can't match. Dr. Henley chose that moment to arrive for her evening rounds, her presence a reminder of the medical realities I was trying to ignore in favor of the security concerns. How are we feeling? She asked with professional warmth, then noticed the tension in the room. Is everything all right? Doctor, what are the risks of transporting Amanda and the baby tonight? Alexander asked directly. Dr. Henley looked between us, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. Transport where? And why? Home, Alexander said, for security reasons. Mr. Romano, Amanda delivered just 6 hours ago. Moving her tonight would be inadvisable unless there's a medical emergency requiring specialized care we can't provide here. Doctor, I said quietly, there are people who want to hurt my baby. Tonight. Alexander needs to get us somewhere safe. Dr. Henley's expression grew serious. I see. In that case, medically speaking, you could be moved if absolutely necessary. You'd need a medical transport team, and I'd want to examine you both before and after. But Amanda, you need to understand the risks. You're still bleeding, still recovering from delivery. Any complications could be serious. The alternative is staying here where my daughter could be targeted by people who want to use her to hurt her father, I said. I'll take the medical risks over that. Alexander moved to the window, his phone already in his hand. I could hear him speaking in rapid Italian to someone, coordinating what sounded like a military operation. When he returned to my bedside, his expression was resolute. Medical transport will be here in 30 minutes. Elena is coordinating with hospital security to ensure we leave without being observed. The estate is already being prepared for your arrival. And Bradford? I asked. Alexander's smile was cold and sharp. Bradford will discover tonight that threatening my family was the last mistake he'll ever make. The transfer to the estate was surreal, like something from a movie. The medical transport team was discreet and professional, monitoring both Arya and me throughout the 40-minute drive to Alexander's country property in Westchester. Arya slept through most of it, seemingly unbothered by the drama surrounding her arrival into the world. The estate was magnificent even in the darkness, with lights illuminating the approach drive and security personnel visible at strategic points throughout the grounds. The house itself was a masterpiece of old-world elegance, with soaring ceilings, marble floors, and artwork that belonged in museums. But it was also a fortress. I could see the discreet security cameras, the reinforced windows, and the way the staff moved with the alertness of trained professionals rather than household employees. "Welcome home," Alexander said as we pulled up to the front entrance. "Both of you." The master suite had been transformed into a temporary medical facility, with everything Dr. Henley had requested for my recovery and Arya's care. A bassinet that probably cost more than most people's cars sat beside the king-sized bed, and a nursing chair positioned by the windows offered views of the estate's manicured gardens. "This is incredible," I breathed, settling into the bed with Arya in my arms. "This is necessary," Alexander corrected, but his voice was gentle. "I will not have my family vulnerable to people who mistake kindness for weakness." Elena appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. "Sir, Bradford's team attempted to breach hospital security 20 minutes ago. They were detained by our people and turned over to hospital security, who found them in possession of weapons and restraints." "And Bradford himself?" "Currently being questioned by federal authorities regarding financial irregularities in his political donations. I believe the interview will be quite lengthy and thorough." The satisfaction in Elena's voice was subtle but unmistakable. Bradford had moved against Alexander's family and discovered that some people were far more dangerous than they appeared. "Is it over?" I asked. "For Bradford, yes," Alexander replied. "For anyone else who might be foolish enough to think they can threaten what's mine, tonight will serve as an educational example." As if sensing the resolution of the immediate threat, Arya began to fuss, her tiny cries indicating she was ready for her first feeding at our new home. I adjusted my position to nurse her, marveling at how natural it felt, despite everything we'd been through in the past few hours. "She's going to grow up knowing she's protected," I said, as Arya settled into nursing. "She'll never have to be afraid the way I was." "She'll grow up knowing she's loved," Alexander added, sitting on the edge of the bed beside us. "She'll also grow up knowing that love without power to protect it is just vulnerability." "And what about us?" I asked. "What do we grow up to be?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on our daughter. When he spoke, his voice carried a certainty that settled something deep in my chest. "We grow up to be a family," he said. "The kind that protects each other, that builds something lasting, that faces whatever comes together." He looked at me then, his dark eyes intense. "The kind that never lets fear keep them from choosing love. Even when love is complicated?" "Especially when love is complicated," he replied, "because that's when it matters most." As snow continued to fall outside the windows of our fortress home, I held our daughter and felt the final pieces of my new life click into place. I was no longer the frightened woman who'd been abandoned by a coward and forced to serve tables to survive. I was Amanda Romano, mother to an heir, partner to a powerful man, and protector of a family that would never again know vulnerability. The fairy tale I'd once believed in with Marcus had been a lie, built on promises that crumbled the moment they were tested. But this wasn't a fairy tale. This was something stronger and more real, a partnership forged in truth, tested by adversity, and sealed by the precious life we'd created together. Alexander leaned down to kiss first me, then Arya, and I felt the last of my old fears finally release their hold on my heart. Ti amo, mia familia, he whispered. My love, my family. Forever, I whispered back, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Outside, the snow fell on a world that had tried to break us and failed. Inside, the Romano family was finally complete, unbreakable, and ready to face whatever came next. Together.